Okay, hello and welcome. I'm Jason Gumper from MSDynamicsWorld.com, and we are here for a new session in our Spring 2015 Financial Automation webcast series. Today I'm happy to welcome a returning speaker for us, Steve Endow. Steve is a returning speaker. He's a Microsoft MVP and a real GP expert. He always has an interesting perspective on the challenges that GP users are facing in their businesses, so I'm really looking forward to this event. And before we get started, I'd also just like to recognize our webcast series sponsors and thank them for their support of MSDynamicsWorld.com. They are Perceptive Software, Metafile, DocStar, Bottom Line Technologies, and Avalara. So as we get started, please know that you can use the Q&A block or the chat that you'll see on the right side of the session to ask questions and provide your thoughts. Steve will have some questions for you in the audience today, and we'd love to see your responses to those throughout the event. So without further delay, Steve, let me hand it off to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Jason. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, excellent. So welcome, everyone. And today I'd like to talk about 6 tips for success with e-commerce and Dynamics GP. And the goal would be to help you get the most out of your e-commerce solution and Dynamics GP. So a little bit about me. I'm a Microsoft MVP focused on Dynamics GP. I have over 10 years of experience with Dynamics GP and a total of over 18 years of software development experience. So I have a little bit of a technical background, and currently my focus is on Dynamics GP integrations and customization. So that's where I'm coming from largely with this presentation based on my experience developing integrations for GP and e-commerce solutions. And I post articles on the Dynamics GP Land blog with my co-blogger, Christina Phillips, who is also a Microsoft MVP. So who is this presentation for? I wanted to orient it towards Dynamics GP customers looking to implement a new e-commerce solution that integrates with GP, or customers that are looking to upgrade or replace their e-commerce solution or enable an integration with Dynamics GP. And my focus is on e-commerce solutions that do not have a dedicated Dynamics GP connector, that aren't specifically designed for Dynamics GP, and because that produces certain challenges. And my primary focus was not on the GP-specific e-commerce solutions that already have the dedicated connectors and focus heavily on GP. However, some of the tips that I cover may still be applicable to that situation. So I'd like to make this interactive. Looks like we have a small group attending today, but I will have some short surveys throughout the presentation. Feel free to respond as those come up. I'd be interested to hear where you're at. And also feel free to submit some questions during the presentation. We should have plenty of time, so I should be able to take some time out to answer any questions as we progress. So why talk about e-commerce and Dynamics GP? Why cover this topic? I think the primary reason is that Dynamics GP does not have a native e-commerce solution. So you can install GP and get it configured and have a great GL, AP, AR, SOP, distribution, inventory. All that functionality is native. But if you want e-commerce, you need to look to a third-party product or a hosted e-commerce solution or a custom website solution. So it's really, I think it deserves a dedicated conversation. And I'm currently in the process of developing 2 fairly complex e-commerce integrations with GP. So it was relevant, so I thought I'd talk about some of my experience there. And coincidentally, I also had a conversation with another GP partner who shared some familiar stories and challenges about an e-commerce integration that his customer was implementing. So in general, e-commerce integrations and implementations are often much more difficult than you might expect. The e-commerce and website side can take longer, and the integration with GP can be more challenging than you might think. So a quick survey. What category are you in terms of where you're at with e-commerce? And feel free to respond in the chat window if you can, and just type a letter A, B, C, or D to indicate whether you don't have an e-commerce solution or no integration with GP, or you do have an e-commerce solution but you're not yet integrated, or if you do have an integrated solution with GP. And lastly, if you have one of the GP-specific e-commerce solutions like Notice or K-eCommerce, those are the few that I'm familiar with. Okay, so thank you, Jennifer. So you don't currently have an e-commerce solution and you're looking for something for a GP, and we have a couple others in a similar situation. So excellent. So you're looking to learn more, it sounds like. And let's just see. Okay, great. So hopefully this is helpful, and I cover some planning steps and strategy recommendations that are helpful for you as you embark on that journey. So these are the 6 tips that I'm going to cover, and I'll cover each of them in detail as we progress. And there are probably a couple hundred tips that could be covered, both large and small, but I wanted to narrow it down to just 6 points to try to stay focused and to hit some of the fundamental concerns that you're probably going to run into. And I think these really address some of the common issues that you'll experience. So we'll cover each of these specifically. First of all, be clear on your e-commerce functionality. And this and the other points may seem a bit obvious or overt, but you would be surprised at how challenging it can be to know what functionality you want to include in your e-commerce website and how you want that to translate to Dynamics GP. It's not that you won't be familiar with the option if it's presented to you, but oftentimes if you don't think of the option or if you don't think of the feature, you may be surprised that it's difficult to think of these things unless someone presents them to you. So an example is, who's going to shop on your website? Who are your customers? Do you have retail customers, or do you also need to accommodate wholesale customers or distributors? Those different types of customers may need a different experience on the website, and that can involve different inventory items that they see or don't see. And maybe you have different price levels for each of those customers, or maybe some order in bulk and some do not. Are you going to support multiple countries or currencies? Orders outside the U.S., if you're located in the U.S., that presents certain challenges. Are you going to accept gift orders if you're in the retail business, or will you have gift cards? And will customers have online accounts where they can look up their order history or order status and see tracking numbers and things like that? And I mentioned this point about e-commerce functionality because almost all of these items relate to your Dynamics GP system, whether it's features that you'll need to have in GP, or the mechanism that you integrate data with GP, or data that needs to come from GP and be sent to your website. Almost every piece of the functionality on the e-commerce website will need to be coordinated with your GP solution. So that's why it's important to really identify that functionality up front. Point number 2, keep an eye on the web developers. And I don't mean to be critical of web developers, but they are often focused on the web development and e-commerce development. And it is not necessarily their job to manage your entire solution from the shopping cart all the way through to order fulfillment and accounting inside your business. It's a very large scope. So as they focus on their piece, some things fall through the cracks based on my experience. And one of the biggest things most common things that I hear that concerns me is when a web development firm, most likely the sales team, when they're presenting their sales pitch to you, they often say that they have integrated with other ERP systems. Yes, we've integrated with SAP or Sage or MAS or whatever the product is, and they'll reassure you that they can integrate with Dynamics GP. Well, each ERP system is different, and no matter how many times they've integrated with other systems, Dynamics GP is a slightly different architecture, a different data model, and it's going to present entirely new challenges that prior experience with other systems may not resolve. So just be wary of that, and unless it is a dedicated GP solution, or unless they have specifically integrated with GP multiple times and you have those team members on your team, you can't necessarily rely upon that. And next up, web developers aren't necessarily business process experts. So you will have some idea of a business process that will be implemented in GP, and that may not mean much to them. So orders versus invoice. Are you going to transfer your transactions from your website into GP as an order or an invoice? How does that affect your fulfillment? How are you going to process payments? What if you have back orders? All those issues, those may not be the top of their list. And so you need to be aware that you need to take care of many of those things. The web developers won't necessarily have them on their radar. And overall, obviously, web developers are going to be focused on the web, not on GP. So when they're addressing the issues on the website, you need to consider the implications and how you're going to address those features in GP. So customer classes, that's a term from GP, that's a design option in GP, and it may not mean anything to the web developers. So you'll want to think about how those features are incorporated and just understand that they won't necessarily be focused on them. And again, web developers are often focused on design. And so the design of a website, the look and feel, the customer experience, all of those elements will be their focus. And as a result, it can often push other functionality later in the process, which can really mess up project schedules. So I have a client on their 4th redesign of their website. I don't know why, but after 7 months, they still haven't started coding on the actual back-end and e-commerce and integration functionality. So that's one of the challenges of a complex or a custom web development. Many of the design elements get priority, and all the back-end work gets pushed to the very end. Okay, know your business process A to Z, and I've alluded to some of these things previously, but one of the key points is your business is actually different. I've heard people say, well, businesses are generally the same, and that's true. You have customers, you sell products or services, you collect money, and you pay your bills. But the way each customer or each business handles transactions, works with customers, different product lines, it results in some small but significant differences, and that will affect how you implement your e-commerce solution and integration with GP. An e-commerce solution touches nearly every aspect of your business, so you really need to be able to know all the operations within your business. It affects marketing, sales. You have your customer service team that's going to be affected by, say, website inquiries or customer orders. Inventory, your fulfillment team, your accounting team that has to track and make sure everything is recorded properly. So all the elements of your business are typically affected. And that really leads to you needing to build a team to help design and implement your e-commerce solution so that it works well with GP. I had a client that appointed one person as a project manager, and they didn't have a supporting team to help her out. And so she was really challenged trying to answer all of the questions about orders and process flow and how certain inventory was going to be handled, how do they deal with this transaction situation. She didn't have the supporting team, so she had to constantly go back and forth to individuals and try to figure out who was going to be able to answer that question. And so I'd recommend up front recognizing that you will need to have multiple subject matter experts to support any project manager you appoint. Okay. I would recommend involving a Dynamics GP expert. And if you have a GP expert on staff or as part of your team, that's fantastic. If you don't, most customers that I work with do not. They rely upon consultants and their GP partners. So in that case, I would recommend making sure to involve your GP partner from the beginning. At least let them know what you're doing, give them a heads up, and get some feedback from them. GP has certain fields, certain transaction quirks, and certain processing requirements that web developers may not be familiar with. So they may not understand what a batch is. That's a kind of a GP concept, and some systems do not use batching. So if you talk about batches with web developers, you may need an explanation. And so that small point may be significant. And Dynamics GP may have certain limitations that require enhancements, or maybe you need to adjust your website to accommodate how GP works. So, for example, I've had situations where the Dynamics GP address IDs pose a certain challenge. So, as you may know, customers and vendors have multiple address IDs, whereas your e-commerce website may have a completely different way of managing multiple addresses, such as a gift delivery address for a gift card and multiple shipping addresses there. So you have to work through those translational details between the two systems. And so a Dynamics GP partner or an expert can help you identify some of those potential downstream complications that may affect fulfillment, may affect billing, credit card processing, inventory, shipping, and the accounting and reporting implications. So it's very good to get those a GP expert involved so that you can identify those things early on. Okay, and so I have a brief survey here, and what role would you say your GP partner plays or will play in your e-commerce strategy? And number one would be you haven't yet consulted with your GP partner. Two would be you've talked with them, but maybe they just haven't implemented enough e-commerce and you're looking for some more expertise. Or you are coordinating with your GP partner, or perhaps your GP partner is helping you lead your e-commerce strategy. So I'd be interested to see where everyone is at in that regard. Okay, so it sounds like in the beginning stages here. Okay, so I asked the question just to keep that in mind. Something to keep in mind that the other partner that I spoke with, his client did not consult with him or even tell him they were implementing e-commerce. They relied upon the claims of the web development firm saying they could integrate with GP. And only after the fact was he called and brought in to try to get the integration working. So it was very challenging, and it's much more expensive to have him come in after the fact and try to clean things up than if he were consulted during the design stage. Okay, great. So someone is consulting with their GP partner. Excellent. Okay. So making the integration with Dynamics GP a priority. So this isn't just a data import into Dynamics GP. It's what I would call a system integration. You have your e-commerce system or your website, and you have your GP system, and those two systems need to talk. And I like to think of it as you need to communicate between the two systems. It's not just importing a transaction and nothing else happens. So I'd recommend that you develop your website. I would not recommend developing your website and then attempting to integrate with GP later. Make sure that your GP integration design is part of your website requirements or it immediately follows the design of your website. As I mentioned previously, include your GP expert in the discussions, including the integrations. They will likely raise some questions and challenge certain assumptions about how data is going to be passed, how transactions are going to be processed. And system integrations overall are often much more complex than you would anticipate, particularly, for example, a two-way integration. If your Dynamics GP system needs to send data back to your website, you need to do that additional work, and it presents certain complexities that a one-way integration, simply importing into GP, wouldn't require. So my last point is to watch out for some of the extra features. And these are often features that are nice to haves, or they're differentiating features that are appealing to customers or oriented towards making the e-commerce experience more appealing to your customers. Or they could be features that differentiate you in the marketplace or your business. So some examples that I've seen that may seem simple but produce some interesting complexities. One was gift cards. So if you want to accept gift cards on your website from customers, these pose certain challenges. If someone orders 5 gift cards and they want those mailed or emailed to 5 different people, how are you going to manage those ship-to addresses or email addresses? Dynamics GP may not behave in the way that you would want for managing that transaction. And balance tracking. How are you going to manage gift card balances? GP doesn't have a native gift card feature. So you'll need to use inventory or some other functionality to track a gift card balance, make sure it's managed properly. And fraud prevention. If someone tries to submit 2 orders very quickly with the same gift card, you need to make sure you're decrementing your gift card balance to prevent overuse or overextension of a gift card balance. And if you have retail stores, for example, what if someone comes into the retail store, wants to transact? How is that transaction at a point of sale system going to flow to GP and reduce the gift card balance? All sorts of challenges around that. Order management and what I would call order splitting. There are situations where if an e-commerce order comes in and it involves in-stock items or out-of-stock items or maybe some customized items like embroidered or maybe the initials or some custom messages on an item, or it includes multiple gift cards that you want to ship out quickly. How do you manage the timing and sequencing of that type of order? You can perhaps do multiple fulfillment rules, or you can do an order splitting. Things that you may take for granted in GP could pose a challenge with an e-commerce order. A customer loyalty program was another interesting challenge. If you reward customers for frequent purchases, or they get points, or they have a discount card, how do you track that and manage that? Is it in GP? Is it in another system? How is that going to flow through the website, through your GP transactions, or your retail systems? It's a challenging requirement. And website updates, meaning providing the website with updated information such as order status changes or tracking numbers. And where will email updates come from? Will they be sent by the website? Will GP send them? Or how are you going to manage things like sending out a tracking number when an item ships? So those are some things that may not seem like significant features, but they can be challenging to implement, and one of the challenges overall is that many consumers are used to the level of functionality that an Amazon.com may offer, with all the very rich inventory management and shopping experience and shopping carts and order management, and you have all the free shipping or discounted shipping. All of those elements can be very challenging to implement. Okay, so survey 3, if you have started on an e-commerce design process or thought about it, are there any challenges that you found so far, or features that you think might be challenging to implement? I'd be interested to hear any experiences you may have other than what I mentioned of, say, gift cards or loyalty programs. So if you could respond there, I'd be interested. Okay, well, I'll look for those responses and move on to the next step. So those are the 6 overall tips I'd recommend. Those are fundamental things that I think you need to consider and look at as part of your project. And there are many more, of course, but definitely include those, I would say. And based on my experience, I'll offer a few technical tips since I come from a technical direction and deal with the integrations in the back end. Given the popularity of Linux websites, if you are going with a non-GP specific solution, or you're going with a hosted e-commerce solution, in my experience, the Linux websites are very popular, and so you may need to consider that you'll need to accommodate a Linux e-commerce platform, and they may use a programming language or platform like PHP or Ruby or something else, Java. So one of the challenges that presents is you'll need to integrate that Linux platform with Windows in the GP world. So the next point that you'll want to consider is whether you choose a real-time integration versus an asynchronous integration, pros and cons to both. And so both of these choices impact the tools and technologies and the design that you'll have with a GP e-commerce integration. And so if you're looking at an e-commerce solution, if anyone has an idea, are you looking at a Linux solution, a Windows solution, and then are you looking at a real-time integration or an asynchronous integration? And so, if you're Linux in real-time, you can respond with LR, or Windows asynchronous, WA, for instance. And so I'm curious to know what people are working with. So far, the 2 projects I've been working with that are they're Linux-based, they're externally hosted, custom developed, and they preferred a real-time integration. So I had to develop the tools and integration processes to make that work between Linux and GP in a real-time fashion. So if you're considering a real-time integration, it sounds very appealing, but overall I'd say it's more challenging. You need to ensure that you have adequate performance so that there aren't waits or delays on your website waiting for an integration with GP to respond. You then have certain reliability and availability concerns. So if there's a connectivity error with GP or an issue, an internet connectivity issue, or you need to have server maintenance on the GP side, you don't want to stop orders from being accepted on your website, so you need to consider the challenges there. The benefit is, obviously, a real-time integration does not have delays, and you can have immediate processing of orders. So someone clicks an order on a website, submits it, it goes straight into GP, and customer service can see it and maybe answer a telephone call right away and see that order. So there are definite benefits to that. And what's nice is there are some good tools and technologies now to help facilitate that real-time integration. A term you may have heard is a RESTful API. That's currently a very popular choice for doing these types of integrations via the web. And even Microsoft Dynamics is going to be supporting that in GP with their service-based architecture. Next up is what's called JSON or JSON, and that is simply a means of transmitting data between one system and another, like your website would send the data in the JSON format to Dynamics GP. And it's a very convenient and simple format that I really like. It's an alternative to, say, XML, and I prefer JSON over XML, much easier to work with. Next up is the authentication. If your website submits an order to GP or a GP web service, how are you going to authenticate that and enforce security and validate that the request is legitimate? And there's a very neat technique called HMAC authentication. It works very well, and it's specifically great for cross-platform integration. So if you're working with a Linux website and having to integrate those transactions with GP, HMAC is a really nice way to secure those transactions without having to layer a whole bunch of intricate security on top of the web service. And I've been using Visual Studio 2013 with .NET 4.5 and what is called MVC architecture, the Model View Controller architecture. That's basically a set of tools and templates that Microsoft provides that makes it very easy to develop a web service API or a RESTful API that a Linux website can talk to. It is a great improvement over some of the older tools, so it's a great option if you're considering some custom development to integrate with GP. Now, an asynchronous integration has some significant benefits. It is lower tech, but it is less challenging, and it is much more flexible. So if there is a connectivity issue or an internet connection issue with your GP website or web service, or the website can't communicate with your corporate internal network, you're not worried about that. The website will store the orders and forward them to you at a later point, maybe every hour. And so that offers you some reliability and availability and makes things less critical and much less stressful, honestly. A real-time integration can be very stressful because if you try to maintain systems or if you have a server outage, it affects your ability to accept e-commerce transactions. So asynchronous integration helps reduce the stress significantly. And you then would have many options for tools and technologies. You wouldn't necessarily have to use the latest and greatest. You could be very simple and low tech. It could be transferring data to a SQL Server table. You could even transfer CSV files potentially. So you have a lot more options for simpler tools and technologies there. However, an asynchronous integration does require a little bit extra work to queue the messages or transactions. So the website has to store transactions before it transmits them. And likewise, on the GP side, you're going to have to be able to accept a queue of messages or those messages in bulk and then process them offline. And it can be extra work to resolve some issues. So if you receive a transaction from your website and for some reason it can't be imported in a GP, you then need to look at that data and figure out how to fix the issue so that it can be imported. And that is an extra step that isn't necessarily present in a real-time integration. So pros and cons to consider. There's no right answer. It really depends on your preference and the tools that you'd like to use. Okay, so we can have some questions and answers at this point. We have plenty of time available, and while we're doing that, I've posted some resources. These are just general resources if you have questions about GP, e-commerce solutions, or integrations with GP. There's the Dynamics GP Community Forum. It's a very active forum with lots of participants, lots of people who respond. And so that's a very helpful resource. If you're familiar with GPUG or the GP User Group, they have an excellent community forum, and the responses are top-notch from both consultants and GP users in the community who have been in the trenches and handled some of these issues directly. And then there's my GP Land blog, the Dynamics GP Land blog. Christina Phillips and I post on that blog. And I also repost the articles and some other information on Twitter. So with that, if there are any questions or anything you'd like to ask, I'm happy to answer.
Thanks, Steve. And let me remind folks you can use either the chat block or the Q&A block that you should see to the right of the slides. I also want to remind folks we are recording today's session. Steve, I'm not sure if you actually saw this earlier, but there were some specific comments on the challenge of order fulfillment and partial order fulfillment.
Okay.
That's one of the main challenges, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that feedback. Yes. Order fulfillment and both, as I mentioned, you have potential sequencing issues of you want certain items to ship first. You don't want to hold up the rest of the order. There's also payment issues. So if you're partially fulfilling an order, do you want to do a partial charge on the customer's credit card? Or is your policy to charge the whole order and then issue a refund if you can't ship something? And so it affects both the inventory and distribution, your fulfillment step, your billing, your order tracking and shipment process. So a lot of challenges around order fulfillment. I agree with that.
Question I'm curious about, maybe in your experience, are you seeing more GP customer companies that are looking at sort of B2B or B2C use cases for e-commerce?
I have one of each at the moment in the two projects I'm currently working on. One is a B2B. They essentially have an internal e-commerce platform that they use for managing their orders. And so we're accepting orders there that go into GP, and their internal staff are actually selling their product to customers. So it's an interesting hybrid situation. But in another, the company is actually selling to customers as well as their wholesalers and distributors. So it poses multiple challenges dealing with that, and it's almost as if the retail situation is one of the most challenging, the B2C, much higher expectations, more features are required. You have things like the gift cards and the loyalty programs you have to deal with, and because many of them may not be recurring customers, you have certain support issues you need to consider there. So I think it's a mix. It really depends on the business type. But obviously the classic e-commerce situation is B2C, but I think B2B will hopefully be taking off more.
All right. I'm not seeing any other questions in the queue right now, so we can start wrapping up. Well, Steve, let me just start by saying thanks to you for taking the time to create this material, this presentation, and present it to our audience today.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right, and to everyone in the audience, please be on the lookout for a survey as you depart today. It'll just take 15 to 20 seconds to fill out. We really appreciate your feedback, and I'd like to know what you thought of today's session. Our speakers really appreciate that as well. So without any more questions, I think we will begin to close down for today. That concludes the event. Thanks, and have a great day.